and welcome to Beyond the News. I'm your host, MINA SOHAIL. First, a look at our top stories today. US President Donald Trump writes a letter to Prime Minister Imran Khan. Pakistan's stock exchange loses 1,400 points in intra-day trading. France fuel protests continue as President Macron holds urgent security meeting. International Day of Persons with Disabilities is being observed today. But first, a look at our top story. After a series of angry tweets directed towards Pakistan, US President Donald Trump has now written a letter to Prime Minister Imran Khan in which he has sought Pakistan's assistance in the Afghan peace process. Information Minister Fawad Chaudhry confirmed that the Premier had received a letter signed by President Trump in which he has asked for Pakistan's cooperation to bring Taliban to the negotiating table as the United States seeks its exit strategy from Afghanistan. Now, while the exact contents of the letter have not yet been made public, it is reported that President Trump has told Prime Minister that the Pakistan's relationship was very important to the United States as well as to finding a solution to the Afghanistan conflict. In a meeting with TV anchors and journalists in Islamabad earlier today, Prime Minister himself confirmed the letter and stated that Pakistan is ready to play its due role in ending the prolonged crisis. Now, the letter comes just days after US President launched another tirade at Pakistan, alleging that the country taxes US's taxpayers' money and does nothing in return. At that time, the Premier responded in a series of tweets citing facts about Pakistan's human toll and economic cost for engaging in the war on terror. Now, it should be noted that Pakistan was among the countries that met in Geneva last month to discuss Afghan peace reforms and prospects for the region. Today, it was reported that the United States Special Representative for Afghanistan's reconciliation, Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, will be travelling to 8 nations, including Pakistan, starting this week. US envoy Khalilzad is set to arrive in Islamabad tomorrow, and he will be holding talks with Pakistan's civil military leadership. He had visited the region back in November as well, in which he asked for cooperation of various countries for a peaceful solution of Afghanistan's troubled politics. Now, Ambassador Khalilzad will also be in communication with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani, Chief Executive Abdullah Abdullah and other Afghan stakeholders to coordinate the efforts to bring the Taliban to the negotiating table with the Afghan government. Now, to further discuss this, we have with us renowned journalist PJ Mir. Thank you for joining us, sir. Mr. Mir, this letter is the first inclination we have that the US is interested in a bilateral relationship reset with Pakistan. What are your thoughts on this?
America right now is playing a major game, and including the other European countries, because they see India as a buffer strait between China and, of course, the United States. So they're using India because it's a growing economy. It's a big economy, and they see it as a buffer strait. Whereas in comparison here, they don't see Pakistan as a nobody. So they use Pakistan as and when necessary. And this is the reason, here, as you mentioned, that President Trump is, writing to our Prime Minister. Well, that writing means, frankly, absolutely balderdash. Why? Because Afghanistan's issue is not that important, it's the Kashmir issue. Why is it that no one speaks about the Kashmir issue and they want us to do the Afghan issue? No, I'm sorry. If I was the Prime Minister, I would say, excuse me, thank you very much. We will cooperate as we have done in the past, but enough is enough. You solved the Kashmir issue. We look after the Afghan issue. Afghan war is not our war. It is your war. We've been fighting it as a client state, and enough is enough. So really, we are all living in a political illusion. We're all living in some sort of a hogwash that we're trying to hoodwink each other. I mean, this Khalilzad is going to come and somebody else is going to come and negotiate. What are we negotiating? We have to negotiate our core issue, which has been detrimental for our economy. It has been detrimental for our reputation worldwide because of the Kashmir issue. Because every time anything happens in Pakistan, or anything happens in India, India blames Pakistan for it. And as you know, just recently, I interviewed Elias Davison, and there he categorically said that after all the forensic evidence, Pakistan had nothing to do with the Mumbai attacks. Now they're all interlinked. Well, no one speaks from our side. No one says anything. Whereas in comparison, let me tell you something, that when Osama bin Laden was caught, I was with Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani in his motorcade in Paris, and I did tell the Prime Minister then, sir, please take the credit for catching Osama bin Laden, because Obama right now on that day was 9 points up in the ratings. Sir, we'll be absolutely crucified for that. Well, we didn't give a statement. So today, exactly the same thing happens. Oh, look, we hid Osama. Listen, whatever the politics, right, we have always been very helpful to the Americans. We have always played a very peaceful part. We've always played a very tranquil part. But here, with this letter, frankly, I would put it in a rubbish bin, because I would stand up, as Imran says, that enough is enough, now we are talking on equal terms. Well, talking on equal terms means, Mina, that we have to be issuing and discussing our own issue, which is the Kashmir issue.
Right.
Afghanistan, we can tackle Afghanistan. But if you, yes, go ahead.
Right, Mr. Mir, then, given that Imran Khan had been very critical of America's war on terror in the past, how do you think that he will be responding to this offer of cooperation?
Well, frankly, I mean, this is all diplomatic jargon. Oh, we will help you, you will help us, and so on and forth. Well, how can we cooperate? They've already stopped a $300 million aid. Every time we do something independently, they try and put us or threaten us with sanctions and so on and forth. Today, we have to take a stance. And unless we don't take a stance, I don't think we'll move anywhere. We're just going, look, I was speaking to some former prime ministers, and every time India or Pakistan sit on a table on a dialogue, because it all relates to India, everything relates to India, because India is playing a negative game for Pakistan, resultant that we get in the crossfire between international frontiers. So we've got to get out of this quagmire and really work at it. What is our problem? Our problem is Kashmir. And today, the superpowers will not address that power. How many times has anybody discussed the massacre, the genocide, the mass killings, the pellet firing and all that? Where has that been discussed on the international frontier? Who talks about it? No one talks about it. But yet, a little girl, gets kidnapped, or a bird gets shot in the European Union. There's a hue and cry. And here there are millions of innocent, forget Muslims, innocent human beings are being murdered, and no one speaks about it. So we've got to really work on that issue.
Fair enough.
Yes, we are there to cooperate, we are there to help, we are there to fight against terrorism.
Right, fair enough. But moving on, it has been learned that Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad will soon be coming to Pakistan to discuss the regional matters. Now, what does his proactive approach towards resolving this crisis suggest to you?
Oh, it's a very simple thing. Previously, they were giving Pakistan little capsules of 10 milligram. Now, today, he'll come and give you a capsule of 25 milligram. And that's what it is going to be. Look, we don't actually address the issue. What we do is talk on ad hoc basis. We can't carry on ad hoc basis anymore. Enough is enough. Look at where our economy is. Look where the dollar has gone. Look where the pound has gone, the yen, and the EU currency. So we've got to be really looking towards us, that how do we stabilize ourselves? And this is an opportune moment for us that we have to actually dictate them. Excuse me, if you want us to resolve this Afghan issue, which is a problem for you, because in the long run, these people go out and do all the damage internationally, and of course, we are the actual victims. Now, you know it as well as I, as the whole of Pakistan. Look, how many civilians have died here? For what? War on terror? Is it our war? No, it is not our war. This is a war created by the superpowers, and we just suffer as a client state who don't even get paid. And even if we want to get paid, well, I'm sorry, we don't get enough what we need. Look at Turkey. For a passage, they got $3 billion. What did we get? peanuts. So I'm sorry, we've got to get out of that rut and really hang in as what Prime Minister Imran says. I totally agree with him that he's got to take a stance. When Khalilzad comes, what has he got to offer?
And Mr. B, the elections are coming up in 2019. So do you feel that a peace deal can be brokered between the Afghan government and the Taliban before these elections?
There are two governments which run in the United States of America. One is the CIA and one is the government. Now here, we've got to see what is the role of CIA in this region. It has always played a very prominent and very significant role as far as policy matters are concerned. President this Trump, now of course, he will play that card. Didn't you see even today's reports? We have given enough and billions of dollars, no more. Well, excuse me, we've been doing your job, not ours. You haven't given us anything. What have you given us? Whatever you've given us, we've used it to get rid of this terrorism in this part of the world. And mind you, terrorism has subsided. It's not as much as we were seeing. So today, we've got to see that President Trump, what are his international policies? He will always use Pakistan as a scapegoat. He will always try and degrade Pakistan in the United States and try and get votes. Oh, that is the axis of evil, as was said before. And thanks to our former president, Jalal Musharraf, who took a stand on it, yet nobody else took a stand on it. So today, Imran has a right moment to explain himself. Look, we've had enough. We've suffered enough. We are being used, misused, and abused. Well, enough of that. Let's work on something more concrete, but address the Kashmir issue on a much larger basis. If you don't, this thing will linger on. I remember General David Richards, who I met in London, and speaking on the Afghan war, I said, sir, are you going to be withdrawing as what NATO says, as what Obama says? He says, well, that will be the biggest catastrophe you'll ever see. You know the British history. We've been there for hundreds of years. And look, have they ever realized they are a warring nation, they're a warring tribe, and to get them all together, even you take them to Paris or take them to Qatar, it's not an easy job. So yes, there will be military presence of the Americans and of course the NATO forces, but that is not the answer. The answer, Mina, is education. Who is talking about educating the Afghans? Who is talking about, rehabilitating the Afghans? No one is. They're all trying to do is, look, let's not get into terrorism. Look, terrorism doesn't just stem out of anywhere. It comes out of poverty, it comes out of aggression, and of course, it also comes out of ignorance. So all we have to do, thinking long term, is not to give them aid, but to give them aid in education. As long as we do that and work on that, maybe in 5 to 7 years, the young boy and the young girl who are in Afghanistan, and of course even in Pakistan, we will be harboring them into, let's say, a safer corridor. Otherwise, I'm sorry, this thing is going to continue forever and ever, as we see in Palestine, as we see in Gaza. This will continue all the way through, and there'll never be peace either in this region or in the Middle East.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing some very important insight with us, Mr. PJ Mir, and for joining us on the show. On that note, we take a quick break, but be back soon. Welcome back to Beyond the News. Now, stocks took a beating at the KSE 100 nosedived nearly 1,400 points in day-to-day trading, falling well below 40,000 early Monday. Trading opened at 40,500 points and dropped within an hour before further diving. By that time, the market was down by 1,400 points, or nearly 3% of the total volume. Much of this bear market trend is being attributed to the central bank's decision to hike its policy interest rate by 150 basis points to 10% on Friday last week. Now, this move suggests that the State Bank of Pakistan has sharply cut its economic growth forecasts, which make it unlikely that the central bank will meet its upcoming inflation target as well. The stock market's decline also follows extreme volatility in the currency market when the Pakistani rupee plunged more than 6% at one point before bearing a chunk of the losses. Now, to talk more on this, we're joined by Mr. Fahim Sardar, CEO of Askari Securities Limited, who's with us right now. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
Hi. Sir, so the market needs It looks as though the market needs government direction. Do you think that the government has not been able to give the right information to public to make viable stock related decisions?
I think so. I mean, there's too much happening at the same time. If you look at what the government is trying to do, the mission, I think the whole nation is behind them. Everybody can have their own opinion, but generally they're trying to improve things. But when you break down a mission to strategic, operational, and tactical aspects, it is extremely important that strategic things remain strategic and they're not mixed up with operational and tactical things. In fact, none of these things should be mixed up with each other. Right now, I cannot understand why the state bank would take such huge jumps to increase the interest rate to 10% now. I think at the beginning of the year we were close to 7, now we're at 10. Every percentage point that we increase the burden on our economy, we slow it down. Why? What's the logic behind this? There too many things are being done at the same time. If information is to be given out, it has to be given out in the proper way that it can be digested by the economy, by the people, by participants, by institutions.
Right.
We're just seeing a very aggressive movement in different directions at the same time, which I don't think is going to be that beneficial.
Right. Now, Mr. Sardar, should the government, in your opinion, make it clear that the rupee depreciation is being conducted on IMF's demands?
The government should be crystal clear about this with the nation, because it appears that this is being done at the behest of some request or some demand by IMF. And if the government is going to go to IMF, then might as well just be honest about it, in the sense that be open about it. There's no point in saying that you're not going to go to the IMF and then the next day you wake up to see the rupee plunging by 10 rupees. I mean, it's becoming unbelievable, if you ask me. Because at one point the rupee is allowed to depreciate, and at the same time interest rates are being raised. You see, in economics, these policies do not match each other; they offset each other. Right. I don't understand what they're trying to do here.
Right. Now, sir, what will be the impact of State Bank's decision to hike the interest rate on the general economy?
It slows things down. When it slows things down, what it does is it creates a burden. It's like a car that decelerates, and then when it has to accelerate, it has to burn more fuel. If a car has accelerated and it keeps receiving a minimal amount of fuel, any momentum can be maintained. Right now, when you decelerate, we are going to have to accelerate.
Right.
For that, you need to put in more fuel, more effort, more time, more everything, and that itself is something which I don't think is being factored in.
Right, right. And do you predict that this bear market trend will continue for a long time? When will the market recover some of its losses?
I don't think it will continue for too long, but I do think that the government needs to, I think on at least a fortnightly basis, at the very minimum, they need to start talking to the economy, to the participants. They need to stop letting people guess that, okay, fine. On one hand, we were categorically told that there is no need for any foreign funding. And then suddenly, three things have happened in the market since then, and in the forex market and the stock market, which basically tell us that adjustments are being made for IMF. So you see that they're just contradicting each other,
Right.
the statement and what's happening in the market. I'm just saying, being constructive, that the government has to take whatever it wants to do, whatever it is forced to do. They have to take it in a sequence. Not it's not that people should wake up tomorrow morning to find out that something new has happened.
Right. But then if there is so much uncertainty all around us, what factors are the investors really looking at to make the right decision?
I think at this stage it's a wait-and-see policy. That is the best situation, because if you look at today's volumes, the market went down by approximately 114 points, which is huge. And you had 162 million shares traded, which is absolutely nothing. And of the top 10 volumes, you will notice that only one share or 2 shares were more than 20 rupees in value, and seven shares had absolutely small values, less than I think 20 rupees. So I mean, there's a sentimental shift. You can clearly see that today's movement was sentimental. It was meant to show how the market felt about the policy. Market did not accept it. Market did not digest it. Let's see if it digests it tomorrow.
Right. Now, my last question to you, will stocks remain attractive considering that government bonds offer much better returns?
I think the stocks are extremely attractive. Just today, the Pakistani stocks, many of them, they became 5% more attractive. So they're going to beat government bonds in any case. However, we don't like to bet on a bearish sell. We like to bet on little dips, which sort of recover very soon. Right now, what we're seeing, what happened today, was based on a fundamental event that happened with the monetary policy. However, what we saw, the trading that we saw today, was totally sentimental. So you have to balance the two out, which means that there's going to be a sentimental adjustment in the near future. And we can, for example, if we see the government coming up with proper information dissemination,
right,
I think you'll see a recovery pretty quickly.
All right. Mr. Fahim Sardar, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. On that note, we take a quick break, but be back soon. Welcome back to the show. The French government is considering imposing a state of emergency to prevent a recurrence of France's worst riots in years. But while it is open to dialogue, it will not change its course, according to the French presidential spokesperson. Moreover, masked groups ran amok across central Paris over the weekend, touching cars and buildings, looting shops, smashing windows and fighting police in the worst unrest the capital has seen since 1968, posing the most formidable challenge to Emmanuel Macron in his 18-month-old presidency. The disturbances have also rocked several cities and towns across France, from its northeast to the west and Marseille in the south. Furthermore, the popular rebellion erupted out of nowhere on November 17th and has spread quickly via social media, with protesters blocking roads across France and impeding access to shopping malls, factories and some fuel stations. The protests began as a backlash against President Macron's fuel tax hikes, but have galvanized into a stronger force that has deep-rooted dissatisfaction towards President's liberal economic reforms, which many voters feel favor the wealthy and big businesses. Meanwhile, authorities were caught off guard over the weekend as escalation in violence overshadowed spontaneous protest movement, which is dubbed as the Yellow Vests because many participants wore the fluorescent safety jackets which are kept in all cars in France. According to the French police, one person has died while more than 100 people were injured in the city, including 23 members of the security forces, and nearly 400 people were arrested as a result of these riots. Hence, Mr. Macron visited the capital to see the destruction firsthand, which was scaled by demonstrators, and due to this, he chaired an urgent meeting at the presidential palace involving the interior minister and top security service officials to resolve the issues at the earliest. However, the French government spokesman has stated that a state of emergency declaration was a possible option and measures could be taken to stop protesters from creating further violence. Therefore, now to talk more about these riots and protests taking place in France, we have our guest, Head of Urdu Service at the DW, Ms. Kishwar Mustafa. Thank you for joining us. Now,
you're welcome.
Ms. Mustafa, what do you have to say about these latest protests dubbed as Yellow Vest movement, creating all these riots in Paris and all over France?
Well, before I go into the details, one thing we should keep in our minds: French nation is very conscious of its rights, and compared to other Europeans, French nation is the most vocal and active nation, which always takes its demands to the streets and becomes agitative. So this is one part of their history. So now the current situation is that this Yellow Vest movement, named after the security outfit for the people on the road, was indeed triggered by a modest hike in the fuel prices. However, the causes run much deeper. it is important to understand that, this movement started in the rural areas of France, mostly in the south and the central France, over the general decline in the living standards of the people. Long nourished by a socialist system, the French don't want to give up what they have been used to, like going on vacations and taking their families to the restaurants.
Right.
These people have come to Paris from all over France for these demonstrations. What is also noteworthy is that they do not belong to any specific political ideology or even a political party. Their anger is targeting the rich, and they dub the French president as the leader of the rich.
Right. Now, the French president, as you brought him up, has so far not submitted to these protests, but has called this emergency meeting. Now, in your opinion, can Mr. Macron diffuse these tensions?
Look, at the moment, it seems that Mr. Macron, he has not shown any flexibility yet, and it seems that he will pursue his policy. I don't think he's going to succumb to the demands of these people. The demonstrators have indulged in certain activities like, burning the cars, looting, and even some cases of rape have been reported. So these will not make their cause dear to the Parisians. And it is difficult to imagine a political change unless Paris rises. Many of these demonstrators who were involved in such crimes have been arrested and are already being tried in the court.
Right. Now, it is interesting to see that all over Europe, the rural working and urban middle classes are disrupting the political dynamics of their countries. Now, are we going to see far right capitalizing from these protests in France as well?
Yeah, this is a very pertinent question. Actually, there is a general discontent in many European countries, which is giving rise to populism. One of the most visible developments is the coming together of center-right and center-left. So in many countries, American example is also quoted by distinguished politicians. These yellow vest protesters could inspire some protests, but because of their disruptive activities, they will not be followed in most European countries. But nonetheless, populism is already on the rise, and it predates yellow vest movement. It is possible that populism could rise in France, but not in immediate future.
Right, right. Now, since you bring up populism, what economic measures can European countries take, in your opinion, to tackle populism?
So they have to satisfy the masses, and this won't be an easy job. And after Brexit, there will be a problem in European Union and European countries. So the problems are manifold, and I don't see any patent recept for this, what could really satisfy these agitated masses and the rise of center-right. But actually, there are many reasons behind it, and we have to deal one by one. And actually, it needs another debate, if you ask me.
Right, right. Mr. Kishwar, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your insight. Now, we take a quick break here. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the program. International Day of Persons with Disabilities is being observed today across the world. The day is recognized by the United Nations and was first proclaimed for observance back in 1992. The day aims to promote the rights and well-being of persons with disabilities in all spheres of society, and to increase awareness of the situation of people with special needs in every aspect of political, social, economic and cultural life. This year's theme is about empowering persons with disabilities and ensuring inclusiveness and equality. And to mark the occasion, Prime Minister Imran Khan reiterated the government's commitment to transforming lives of people with special needs. 1 billion people live with disabilities, making them the largest minority in the world. But back in 2006, 177 countries implemented the landmark Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which showed that all of us can come together on a pertinent issue and work to resolve the difficulties of one another. UN Development Programme has said that on this day, countries need to commit to working together to empower others and to give them equal access and voice in the society. Countries like Pakistan are working diligently on the promise of Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. But aside from the targets to meet in health and employment sectors, one crucial aspect is to leave no one behind, particularly to safeguard the rights of the people who face discrimination and exclusion due to these disabilities. Noting the impact of the global conflicts on persons with disabilities, the United Nations Security Council will also informally meet in New York. The permanent members will be briefed by representatives of Germany, Kuwait, Peru, Poland and Ivory Coast. Ambassador Joanna will chair the meeting, and the participants are expected to raise the issue of how persons with disabilities are affected in most marginalized manner. An estimated 9.7 million people are forcibly displaced as a result of conflict and persecution and are victims of human rights violations and conflict-related violence. In light of this, the humanitarian group Human Rights Watch has asked the Security Council to step up its efforts to gather evidence about the risks faced by people with disabilities and to include them in its efforts to protect civilians during the conflicts. Now, the group has also asked for every UN peacekeeping mandate to explicitly call for the protection of people with disabilities. Now we have our guest Mr. Umair Ahmed with us, who is the Executive Director of Now PDP, an NGO working on this. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now,
thank you for having me.
Now, Mr. Ahmed, what do you make of the renewed commitment by Prime Minister Imran Khan to work for the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the country?
I think it's one of the more progressive steps that we feel the current government has taken, and we are very optimistic at the federal level.
How viable is it though? How workable is it?
I think that was my follow-up point. Yeah, I think since the devolution of power and the 18th Amendment, a lot of the implementation has gotten down to the provincial level, which is where the provinces have to take the lead in terms of implementing things in health and education, but also with persons with disabilities. You'll see that all the respective provinces have taken the lead in trying to bring about job quotas and education mandates for persons with disabilities within the quota. But I think it sends a very good message if the federal government is also getting behind this, because there's still some mandates that the federal government holds, and it has some provincial autonomy when it comes to implementing these things. So I do feel, in terms of a figurative way, it's a great statement. I think in terms of some literal legislation and changes of rule of law that can be passed, from a welfare standpoint, I still think there's a lot to do. But I think the provincial governments have to be empowered to implement the changes that the federal government has.
Right. Now, Mr. Ahmed, since 2006, the UN Convention, what major steps has Pakistan taken towards promoting equality and inclusivity?
Right. I think since 2006, Pakistan Pakistan ratified in 2008, and I think since 2011 has been working towards this. Work has been slow, we won't lie, but we believe that there is an urgency that is built up in the last couple of years because World Health Organization and other UN-affiliated organizations have ratcheted up some of the deliverables that are needed from the government. Again, on-the-ground work has been sporadic and sparse, but I think legislatively speaking, Pakistan has made tremendous progress in terms of ingraining some of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, into its framework, which we feel will translate into tangible action on the ground. But I think it's still yet to be found out. But we feel like there is some progress.
I'm also interested in knowing about employment though. What major obstacles do persons with disabilities in our country face when it comes to employment, and do we have any laws that protect against any discrimination?
Right, that's a fantastic point. Again, as I was mentioning before, each province has the ambit of responsibility of implementing a job quota within those companies and organizations that are registered in that particular province. So any organization or institution over 100 people employed registered in Sindh has to comply with a 5% quota. In Punjab, it's 3%. In KPK, it's 3%. And in Balochistan, it's 5% again. Failing this, there is supposed to be some punitive punishment that is supposed to be imparted on those companies that are not implementing this quota, which is equivalent to, I believe, the minimum wage of the land. But this has not been enforced. The challenges that persons with disabilities face in getting jobs is, one, a lack of education hinders them from being eligible for white-collar jobs, a lot of those. For the blue-collar jobs, there are issues of accessibility and infrastructural deniability that actually hamper companies from becoming inclusive and accessible, and from persons with disabilities to access the facilities.
Right,
which is, I believe,
right. That's a very interesting thing that you mentioned, and I actually want to know more about it. All these new buildings and really big offices and structures that are set up now, I do not really come across accessibility for people with disabilities. Why do you think is that so? Why isn't it really mandatory? I mean, it's 2018 and we have buildings where you can't even have access to it.
Well, I think it's partly having to do with the fact that, just recently we started working on things which were as illegal as encroachments. So when it comes to, good faith laws like Accessibility Code of Pakistan 2006 that made sure that all government buildings were supposed to be accessible, were not implemented to the letter of the law. Even when you saw things like ramps, they were not built to the appropriate gradients that a person with disability could go without assistance. But one more thing that has to be considered is disability is not just limited to wheelchair ramps. I think it is a more holistic picture that has to be presented. And I think a lack of awareness with a lot of these new organizations or even large organizations that might have progressive ideologies otherwise, but they're not as well acquainted with accessibility beyond having a wheelchair ramp. And I think it falls upon organizations like ours, as well as the government, to increase awareness about what accessibility truly means, and ensuring that the rule of law, which emphasizes as per the Accessibility Code of Pakistan 2006, these institutions are accessible and inclusive, so the persons with disabilities can also partake from an employment standpoint as well as a utilization of services standpoint.
Right, and on that particular note though, do you really feel that major reforms are still required?
From a latest standpoint, I believe everything is in the documentation. Sindh recently passed a law in July of 2018, which is a very comprehensive coverage of all elements of inclusion, including accessibility. And I think Punjab has made some progress, but I think it's a question now of standard operating procedures or SOPs being put into place which implement these laws. I think there is hope for progress. Again, I am a very optimistic person because of the sector I work in, so I feel like if the government has the appetite, there are rules of law that they can follow and implement.
Right.
And I believe without vested interest, it's possible.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your views with us, Umair Ahmed. That's all we have for you for tonight. Join us tomorrow as we take you beyond the news.